Federal Fag and Alex Reynolds Mystery Series Book 2. Author Fred Hunter, publisher St. Martin's Press, New York, 1998. Narrator Eric Aust. For Raymond Dragon. Chapter 15. There were two possible resources for the information we needed. Derek Holmes, whom I didn't think we dared approach at this point, and Jeff Durkin, whom I was reluctant to approach for fear of getting him killed. But we didn't have much of a choice. Jeff lived in West Hollywood, the boys' town of the LA area, on a side street called Sherman Avenue, just off Santa Monica Boulevard. Unlike the jungle foliage lime street on which Patrick Gleason had lived and died, Sherman Avenue was relatively open to the sun in a stranded in the desert sort of way. It seemed to be suffering from the worst type of glowing haze. It was bright in a hot, dusty skin roasting way that beat down so hard on the buildings that they seemed to be crumbling under the weight. The effect was of brightly lit decay. The street was lined on both sides with cars, all of which belonged in the front yard of some backwoodsman with more children than teeth. We parked directly behind a dark blue Volkswagen Bug with empty food cartons piled from floor to ceiling in the back seat. It made the name Bug conjure up some rather unfortunate visual images. Jeff's apartment was in a small, flat, L-shaped building that looked like a stucco version of the Bates Motel. It was painted the color of putrefied algae. According to one of the peeling labels on the line of broken mailboxes, Jeff Durkin lived in number 8, which was in the armpit of the L. The three of us walked carefully along the cracked walkway that ran the length of the building, cautious lest we slip and slide on the moss that seemed to be growing out of the concrete instead of over it. The door to Jeff's apartment bore 5 long, vicious cracks running diagonally down from the peephole to the doorknob. They looked like they'd been left there by Freddy Krueger. Some indecipherable, overproduced pop music was blaring from inside. I knocked on the door and we waited, but there was no answer. I figured it must be really difficult to hear over the music, so I knocked again, louder with my fist. After a minute, the music suddenly dropped to nothing and the door flew open. Jeff stood there naked, but holding a washcloth over the crotch, which I figured was his ideal of modesty. He looked startled for a moment before he recognized us and smiled. Then he noticed Mother. "Oops, just a minute." He disappeared back into the apartment. If I'd ever answered the door like that, my mum would have skinned me for sure, said Mother, her eyebrows slightly raised and a doubtful smile playing about the corners of her mouth. Peter turned his most winning grin on her and replied, "If you'd answered the door like that, you would have looked like a Botticelli." Her smile broadened as she narrowed her eyes at him. "I don't know exactly what you mean by that, but it's the type of thing that makes me glad you love my son." Jeff popped back in the doorway, having thrown on a pair of jeans and a sleeveless black t-shirt. Sorry. I was just getting cleaned up out of the shower." "It's okay," I said. "Can we talk to you for a minute?" Sure, come in," he said. He walked into the apartment, which we took as our cue to follow. The inside of his apartment made Patrick's look like a palace. The floor was solid cement, the middle of which was covered with a really frightening throw rug. And that's not just coming from the perspective of someone stereotypically supposed to have some interior design sense. Even if I were straight, I'd have found that rug frightening. "Eau de mold," Peter whispered to me. I nodded. It really did smell as if mud had settled like squatters in the corners of the room. There was a little round table sitting against one wall and a tiny portable television set on it, along with a boombox that had presumably been the source of the noise. The only other piece of furniture in the place was a couch, which looked like it had been upholstered with the coat of a recent immigrant. Mother, Peter, and I sat on it gingerly. I could have sworn a puff of dust flew up from it as we came to rest, and Jeff pulled up a folding chair that had one broken leg. He said, I can't get you anything because I don't have anything except some red wine, unless... Would you like some wine? We all declined graciously. So, what did you want to talk about? Well, I said, taking the lead, I was wondering, the day that you filmed with Patrick, the day he was killed, was anybody else there? Oh, sure, he said ingenuously. Lots of people. I'd gone beyond the point of being shocked by these guys, especially by Jeff, who, unlike Patrick, wasn't purposely trying to shock me. And that's what made it so sad. It wasn't his fault. It wasn't that Jeff had lost his values. It was more like his education had stopped before reaching the V's. Who? I asked. He shrugged. Everybody that was going to work. There were 5 or 6 guys. They were doing an awful lot of filming that day. Actors? Said Peter. Jeff nodded. I thought about this for a moment, but I just couldn't believe that anyone from the mob would be actively participating in the videos. Was anybody there who wasn't actually in the videos? I mean, anybody who was just there? Jeff's angelic face clouded over as if the energy that lit it was needed elsewhere in order for him to remember. After a moment, the cloud passed, and he blinked a couple of times. Oh, yeah, that Willie Marino guy was there. Who's that? Mother asked. He's from... Let me see if I can remember the name of it. I think it's called Admiral No, that's not it. Admiral General Distributors? I said, a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. That's them, he replied brightly. They're the ones that market the tapes. For some reason, I had the feeling that marketing in this case had something to do with breaking arms and fitting seamen overshoots. But then again, my entire knowledge base for organized crime comes from movies of the 30s and 40s. Willie's around a lot, Jeff continued. He leaned in toward the 3 of us and added conspiratorially, between you and me and the lamppost, I think he'd like to watch. He sat back in his chair, which let out a metallic groan. You must have seen him. This had me totally perplexed. Where would we have seen him? At the party at Derek's house. He was there. Which one was he? You had to have seen him, Jeff replied with an impatient roll of his eyes. He sticks out like a sore thumb. He's a real good-looking guy. You've seen him. You remember? He was talking to Derek when you asked me who Derek was, the guy in the gray suit. I could feel my eyes widening. The man in the gray suit, the one who'd looked out of place because his mode of dress and his manner were both so businesslike. I hadn't known anyone from Admiral General Distributors was at the party. It meant that a member of the mob had been present when we were asking questions about Patrick, and when we made our appointment with Brett. It meant something else, which made me feel afraid for the first time since we'd been attacked in the alley behind the bar. It meant that Marino, who apparently worked for the mob, most likely had known who we were from the moment we set foot in that party. After all, we'd have to give our names at the door, and they were written down by the leather queen on guard at the door. Many of the subsequent events clicked into place. Was Marino there when Patrick and Brett performed together? Jeff shrugged again. The action was beginning to annoy me because it made me think I might have been wrong about him. Maybe he'd had values at one point and had to shake them off his shoulders every time they tried to land. He was there when I did it. I don't know how long he stayed. There wasn't anything else we needed to learn from him, so we rose and started for the door. Mother and Peter stepped out onto the walkway, and I hesitated in the doorway. I took Jeff's hand in action that seemed to startle him. Look, I really don't think you should go on working for Man O' Man. Why not? Said Jeff, his eyes growing wide. I shook my head wearily. Jeff, it's just not safe. There's something going on there. I don't know what it is, but I know it's dangerous. He started to protest, but I cut him off. You know it's dangerous. For God's sake, 2 guys are dead. That don't have nothing to do with me. His eyes had become vacant again, and I knew it was a lost cause. I didn't know if he was too afraid to face the facts or too afraid to face a possible change, but I knew the warning was no use. We said goodbye and left. "Well, that's that, then, isn't it?" said Mother as I drove our little company back to the hotel. "Is it?" I replied gloomily. "It seems obvious, darling. This Marino person was there when Patrick mentioned the CIA." "We don't know that. I think we can assume it. He heard what Patrick had said. He's with the distribution company being investigated by the government. So Marino heard what was said, realized he and his company were in danger, and then killed Patrick and Brett Lover, or had them killed. And Marino was at the party," said Peter, "which explains the attempt on our lives on the way home." "But why kill Brett Lover?" I said, feeling more and more dissatisfied. "Just because he heard Patrick too?" Mother pursed his lips. "I think it more likely that they followed us and shot Brett when they saw he was going to talk to us." "Yeah," said Peter, warming it to the idea. "It's obvious. They've been following us because we were attacked outside that bar, the Peacock." "An attack that was interrupted very conveniently by Reinforced," I countered. "We so silent for a moment, then a new idea came to me. Maybe that means that Reinforced is also part of the mob." I turned to Peter. "Didn't you get the feeling he was trying to warn us off?" Peter nodded. "Not too indirectly, either." "But that doesn't make sense," said Mother. "These people don't exactly shy away from killing. Why on earth warn you off instead of just having done with you? They certainly could have shot you at the pier when they killed Lover." I thought about that for a moment. Well, if they really do think we're with the CIA, they might not have wanted to kill us because it would bring the CIA down on them. "I see," said Peter, nodding slowly. "So they just killed anyone who they thought was talking to us, except that doesn't explain the attempt on our lives on the way home from the party." I know, I said, my mind spinning. We fell silent again for a few minutes, each of us lost in his or her own jumble of thoughts, trying to work it out. Mother finally broke the silence. "You know, all this still only leaves us with Willie Marino. We know he was there the day Patrick mentioned the CIA, and he's the only one we know of directly connected with Admiral General Distributors." I said dully, my mind occupied. Mother huffed in exasperation. "Do you have any doubts about Marino being the murderer?" "Oh, no, not at all." "Then what's the trouble?" I sighed. "It isn't enough to know who did it if he's never caught." "I agree," said Mother wearily, apparently already unhappy with where this was headed. "But don't you think that's something to leave to the professional?" "You mean like Nelson?" Peter was unable to hide the distaste in his tone. I got the impression he was much more interested in continuing his investigation than in catching the man who murdered two faggots. "Not Nelson, necessarily," said Mother. "We could take our suspicions to Detective Furness. According to Reinforced, the police already know about the mob connection to this, and they know when to look the other way." Mother replied in her haughtiest upper-crust British accent. "If Mr. Forrest is also in the mob, I hardly think his word is unimpeachable." "Perhaps," I replied, "but Furness referred to these porn stars as disposable, and Nelson called them unfortunate. I'd much rather depend on someone who thinks all human life is worth something, like us." "Alex," said Mother wearily, "you can't seriously be thinking of taking on the mob. Are you out of your bloody mind? I'll not have you committing suicide." She looked as though she'd kill me first. "I'm not talking about taking them on, but maybe we can find proof that Marino is the killer." "And how do you propose to do that?" "March into Mr. Marino's office and say, 'Excuse me, love, but did you happen to kill a couple of young men? I'll be having you picked up and thrown in Bedlam.'" "Oh, don't go all Dickensian on me," I replied irritably. "Your mother's right, Alex," Peter chimed in. "This is too big for us." I wasn't talking about confronting Marino. For God's sake, I'm not an idiot. I'm just talking about trying to get evidence of his guilt. If we could do that, then Nelson, Furness isn't going to let a killer get away. How do you expect to find evidence? Unless Marino is a total half-wit. He's not keeping a log of who he's killed each day, said Peter. I sighed wearily. They were chipping away at my resolve, even though on a purely primal level I was determined not to let 2 murders go unpunished. Finally I said, well, maybe you're right. Maybe there's no evidence anywhere that he's a murderer, but we might be able to find evidence of his mob connection, and that might be just as good. If we can't get him put away for murder, maybe we can get him put away for something else. I think this was really the first time in my life I'd ever seen my mother go red in the face. She took a deep breath to calm herself and tried to reason with me without further losing her temper. Darling, I know you're upset, but you have to think about what you're suggesting. Surely you realize that if this Marino person is responsible for 2 deaths, any hint from you that you're investigating them will be a suicide. Maybe, I admitted reluctantly. And if you won't think of your own skin, think of who else you'll be affecting. You and Peter will... I started, but she cut me off. Not us, darling. If Marino's the killer, he already at least suspects there's something wrong at that video company. If he doesn't know it for sure, if you do anything to confirm it for him, however innocently or well-intentioned, he might decide to cut his losses and get rid of everybody concerned. That really did bring me up short in the most frustrating way. She was right. I felt like I had nowhere to turn, while at the same time I wanted to run in all directions at once. For God's sake, I can't just sit and do nothing, Mother nodded sympathetically. We can go back to the hotel, have a nice dinner, and sleep on it. See if our heads are clearer in the morning. Maybe then we can think of a less fatal way to proceed. Sleeping on it would have been a great idea if I'd been able to deaden my brain, but by the end of our dinner in the hotel restaurant, I knew that wouldn't be possible. All the way through the meal, the various people we'd questioned kept popping into my mind like a psychotic episode from a 40s movie. I was sure that if I tried to let it go for the evening and went to sleep, I'd have one of those Salvador Dali nightmares like Gregory Peck had in Spellbound. We were done eating before 6, and by that time I'd made a decision. Mother and Peter might be right about the folly of butting heads with a mom, but I was right too. I had to do something, and the safest thing I could think of for the time being was to case Marino's lair. As we exited the restaurant into the lobby, I told Mother to go up to her room without us. I was, of course, assuming my husband would come with me. Why? She said, stopping abruptly. Oh, I just want to ask the concierge about something and maybe pick up a pack of cigarettes, I replied. I could feel my cheeks redden. God, I wish I could be more like my mother when it comes to stretching the truth. Alex, she said with a touch of warning in her voice. I just need a little smoke to help me relax. I yawned disingenuously and added, I'm so tired. One corner of Mother's mouth went up, the other went down, and there was a hint of a sparkle in her eye. Very well, she said, and after a slight hesitation, she headed for the elevator. Peter turned to me and said, What are you up to now? I'm not going to get any sleep tonight if I don't do something. I just want to find Marino's company and maybe have a look at it. What can it hurt? Our arms, our legs, and various other parts of our anatomy, he replied reluctantly, following me to the information desk. One of the perks of staying in a really classy hotel is that the concierge has to locate things for you. We asked the young woman at the desk to look up Admiral General Distributors for us, and she pulled out various phone books and quickly made her way through them. She was so striking that I was now convinced that L.A. really is manned entirely by male and female starlets. Here it is, she said, thumping the book with her manicured index finger. A look of concern straight out of Chapter 2 of An Actor Prepares creased her lovely face. Are you sure that's the place you want? She said. Admiral General Distributors. I think so, I replied. She squinted at me as if she suspected that I wasn't really a guest at their hotel. Okay, she said. Here's the address. She scribbled it on the notepad and handed it to me. The company was located on Workman Street, which I'd never heard of. Where is that? Peter asked. She pulled out a map and flipped it open, peering at it with all the grim concentration of Vanna White. Then she tapped a spot with her fingernail and said, Here it is, by the river. It's way into the city. She said this with a rueful smile and was meant to convey her embarrassment at having to direct a guest to such a place. I wish I had taken the hint. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.